Welcome to Life by Design, episode 306. Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Cratio Jug.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Cratio, 2019. How many times this week did you write 2018?
You know what? Just once.
Just once? That's pretty good.
More importantly, you should ask me how many times this week did I say, I haven't seen you all year, as my dad joked.
Well, it was the week before New Year's, and in the office it was, well, I guess I'll see you next year.
Nice. See?
Yeah, lots of dad
now
jokes.
we have justification for dad jokes because we're dads.
Of course, that's right. So we are creators of Life by Design with 25 certified locations worldwide. Each week on the show, we discuss the principles and the practice of Life by Design. Today's episode, we're talking about a new release coming up, and that's the Canadian Food Guide. And this is something that we've revisited over and over again. So obviously today is an Eat by Design focus. And it's something that we've always disagreed with on some large scale. And here it is changing again. So that's what we're going to go through today. Do we agree? Do we disagree? What would we do? Rachel, tell us about the article and what's coming down the pipe.
Yeah, so I mean, it's going to be an interesting podcast in the sense that we're not exactly sure yet what's coming down the pipe. We know that it's changing. We know that the focus 100% is specifically less recommendations on dairy products and also the recommendation for less animal products in general, particularly saturated fats, and more emphasis on plant-based products and plant-based proteins.
Okay. And this is something that is happening right away. It's something that is set in stone. What's the feedback here?
I don't have the article. I read it earlier this week, but I seem to recall that it's coming. The food guide is definitely slated to come out updated in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Just not sure when quite yet.
Okay.
But they say they've been saying the gentleman in the article, who I believe is the chair or the director of the part of Health Canada that does this, say that they've been trying to revamp this for years. So this is the years of their cultivated effort based on, quote, the best available evidence, end quote.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, I think that brings up the first conversation, this whole idea of best available evidence. And it's not to say, so let's just, I guess, give a disclaimer. You know, obviously, if you've listened to Life by Design, you've listened to Eat by Design conversations, you've maybe downloaded the ebook, which you can do at lifebydesign.com and check that out and get those free ebooks. If you do, you recognize that our position is about filling the nutritional requirements of the body. So looking for the most nutrient-dense foods that have the least amount of toxicity that help meet the genetic requirements for fuel. And, you know, there's lots of amazing evidence that continues to evolve and support this idea of, you know, looking at what does our body require just from a macronutrient perspective, and then applying whether it be different types of diets or approaches or strategies and measuring that. And so it seems, I don't want to say crazy to me, but it seems interesting to me that, you know, the recommendation is less animal products, more plant-based, and more whole grains. And I'm not saying we shouldn't eat more plants by any means. It's just by moving towards a more plant-based diet and reducing animals and animal fats, we're really restricting one major, very important, vital macronutrient that the body requires in order to work properly.
I totally agree. There's also been, I think what they're doing, I don't remember the name of the psychological technique, but essentially the claim is that, and the defense to that argument that you just brought up, from what I've read, and again, I know this is always changing, but what I've read so far is that they are very strong on their recommendations to limit dairy. And I think, you know, like I think the undermined sliding in with dairy is animal products in general. I think they're doing it in a very non-confrontational, almost, you know, kind of backdoor way.
Right. Well, I mean, they probably recognize the backlash that's going to come from this in many ways, and that's part of the rationale, right? Is how do
Well,
we
it's
make
already happening, right? The
right,
dairy industry is openly very hostile. Because now it's just interesting. You look at this politically. I mean, the dairy industry is regulated by the government. They're
right,
controlled by the government, and now the government. And this is, the case against government regulation is you've been regulated and controlled, and they've made you a lot of money, and now they're kind of turning their back on
right,
you.
right, exactly. That's a whole other podcast,
Well, that's a much bigger discussion, but not on the surface. Here's what you have now.
right? Well, so again, it goes back to this conversation, right? Which is, what's the purpose of nutrition? What's the
Yeah,
purpose
perfect.
of eating food? And,
Perfect.
and, we've often ended up at this place with Eat by Design because our position is that Eat by Design is not necessarily a diet. It's a strategy. It's a way of looking at what are the nutritional requirements for the body. And, we can go back
Right.
to this idea of fat, of protein, of carbohydrate is a macronutrient, whether it is a requirement or not. I mean, technically, if you just from a purely scientific perspective, sure, you can make carbohydrate from other sources, but we've always been positioned as a carbohydrate appropriate diet. So, how much you're training, what's your physical activity like, what are your genetics like to determine the amount of carbohydrate intake that you should have, more about obviously the quality of those carbohydrates versus processed sources and refined carbohydrate sources. But nonetheless, the idea is I'm not super focused or concerned on the breakdown of macronutrients as much as I am the fact of getting my macronutrients from whole food sources with the least amount of processed, processed sugars and toxicities. And yet that's not how most dietary recommendations are made. I mean, this is probably a good spot to talk about, Horatio, but why is Health Canada making this recommendation if the best available evidence isn't necessarily quite what they're recommending?
Well, I mean, I'd hate to play, it's going to be an assumption no matter what I say, but always the issue with something very blanket like, these are the foods that we recommend, takes two things out of the equation, which is number one, the individual at the end and the goals of that individual. Right, like if your goal, remember, we're humans, we're conscious, right? We're not victims of our hormones and our emotions. We get to choose, right? Like we get to choose what we partake in and what we don't partake in based on what our values and our goals are. And I'm going to argue that, I mean, objectively, you need to eat to live.
Mm-hmm.
Our goal is to help you live as long as possible and to be optimally healthy as possible. But a vegan, for example, one of their goals is not to consume any animal products. I don't have any
Right,
moral
right,
judgment on that, but that's part of their choice.
right. No, I
Right.
mean,
So
yeah, for sure.
as a result, like how can you're going to have completely like again, we're going back to strategies and requirements. The requirements, because we're human, are all very similar,
Right,
but you get to choose how to fulfill those requirements. The strategies are vastly different.
right,
And the issue with the food guide is they're offering one strategy to try to fit everybody,
right.
which is impossible.
Well, and you look at that goal, for example, if someone is a vegan, which again, we're not morally judging that, and each person gets to choose their path. But let's say someone is, wanting to be as optimally healthy as possible and have the healthiest physiology as possible, but they don't want to eat meat. I would say that based on my understanding of the best science, that those two things are actually in contradiction to one another.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. I mean, every vegan knows that they have to supplement with things, right? You know that if you're vegan, you have to supplement with
B12, yeah,
B12 micronutrients. You need
omega
a full
3s.
fat
Mhm.
profile. Yeah, we're starting to figure that out. And again, if you're willing to do those things, then more power to you. I completely understand, and I support you as an individual to have those choices,
Correct.
right? But again, like to say that these things, to openly state that we're going to stay away from saturated fat and full fat animal products. They're advocating for low fat dairy, right? Like
Right,
eat
right,
low fat yogurt and low fat
right.
cheese and low fat milk.
As a general blanket statement, say here's the best diet to be healthy, and there's the problem is, you're trying to apply this particular set of foods to something that probably should be more. It wouldn't be great if the food guide was more principle based. right? You need fat, protein, and micronutrients. You need carbohydrates based on the amount of exercise you do and your genetic profile. Of course, that would sound just like Eat by Design. So I guess the second question to ask then is this new iteration of the food guide, these changes, do we think that that's actually an improvement from what exists right now? Now, granted, we don't actually know the whole new food guide and all the major changes, but let's say it's similar to what we're reading. Do you think this is an actual improvement, even though it may not be optimal in our standards?
Tough to say. There are some things that are great. I'm all for people eating more vegetables and plants. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Right. I think if anything, I think some people putting down the processed stuff and picking up more real food, vegetables and fruits. I think that's a wonderful idea. I just can't disagree. Like, I can't agree with, based on what I've read, and I'm baffled. Low fat. Like, I just don't understand where that recommendation is coming from.
Right.
And the issue, of course, is that there's going to be a focus on more grains. And I'm not crazy about that, but simply because I'm okay with eating grains. I eat grains myself, definitely not the central focus of my diet, more of an off-track thing when I consume them, but they're very nutrient devoid.
Yeah, and for the most part,
exactly.
Yeah. And
especially
again,
most of the grains that people are going to choose to consume, like bread and pasta.
Yeah. It's not like people are, going some big, multi-whole grain bowl of oatmeal.
Quinoa or oatmeal, yep.
Exactly. And so, I think that's, leads us to the final piece, which is this variation, even if it's slightly better than the last one, we haven't made that decision, but let's say it is it going to help us meet our nutritional requirements at the peak capacity? I think that's what we're saying is the answer is no. And it always leads back around to this idea of the context, right? Are we trying to be optimal? Are we trying to be better? Are we trying to just not be bad? It's the same thing with every decision making. So if I go to exercise, is walking every day better than nothing? Yes, it is. Is walking every day going to meet the movement requirements of my body? No, it's not. Right? So people say, but walking's good for you. Yeah, I'm not saying it's not good for you. I'm saying that it's not going to be enough to meet the movement requirements of your body and for you to get your body functioning at its peak optimal capacity.
Exactly. I completely agree. And it's the same with this. And again, we don't want to push it's a fine line, right? Like, of course I think everyone should eat the way that I eat. I think I got it right, but that's not the point. The point is we should have the freedom to choose, and your choices are going to, and the consequences and the benefits of those choices, should be your freedom to choose.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, obviously the context of what your goals are, what you're trying to accomplish. And hopefully we've covered that on today's show. Hopefully we cover that on a regular basis and give you guys the freedom and the knowledge to make that decision and help strive towards whatever those goals are for you. And we support that. Whether or not our strategies match up with your strategies, we definitely support your decision in figuring out what you want and how to get it. If we can help you get there, then of course, by all means, let us do. Go to the show notes. You can check it out today at lifebydesign.com/podcast. You can also download the free ebook. You can take the free 30-day challenge, and you can check out today's episode. So thank you so much for listening to Life by Design and joining the drive to 1 million families worldwide living life by design.